How is everyone doing? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today, I'm hoping to bring everybody a rather exciting episode. This is how to survive a wiperware attack. Now, I will warn everybody, this is a little heavy on kind of the definition side. There's a couple of terms and different groups that I've got to define here as we go through this exercise. But I thought this was really interesting. Basically, a couple of the national payment associations got together and did a cybersecurity exercise where they basically looked at, and this was done in March and April of this year, and they looked at how would a bank prepare for and then hopefully survive what's known as a wiperware attack. And I'm going to go through that, and I want everybody to stick around to the end, because what we're going to go through is basically best practices of hopefully how to avoid getting into a wiperware attack, but then also what can you do afterwards to kind of, if you do fall prey to one of these attacks, how can you kind of clean it up after the fact and get back to operating as business as normal. So this stemmed, and I'm going to bring this in real quick. So this stemmed from a blog post that was in the PCBB. This was in their what they call their BID daily newsletter, and this is titled Key Takeaways from a Wiperware Cyberattack Simulation. And the summary says, what happens to your institution during a wiperware attack when all your data files are completely wiped clean? So recently, financial professionals participated in a tabletop simulation of wiperware scenarios. Global Resilience Federation Chairman Bill Nelson shares surprising results from the exercise and tips to help your institution plan for recovery from a wiperware attack. So, and then it goes on to say basically wiperware can literally wipe out all your institution's systems, including backups. Like, are you resilient enough to withstand such a cyber attack? Wiper malware is malicious software that is designed to delete files or destroy data on any device that it attacks. So who was involved in this? So there's two groups, basically what's called the NACHA, the National Automated Clearinghouse Association. Now, NACHA basically manages the ACH network. They are the backbone for the electronic movement of money and data in the U.S., and they are an association for the payments industry. Also included this is a group called GRF, which is the Global Resilience Federation. They are a nonprofit that offers multi-sector cyber and physical security information and education. So they are the two. So NACHA and GRF were the two basically institutions that got together to put on this cyber simulation. Now, before we get started here, I just want to go through a couple of kind of key terms here. So first thing we have what's a malware attack? So for anybody who's not really that tech savvy, so a malware attack is basically, this is any type of malicious software designed to cause harm or damage to a computer, server, client, or computer network and or infrastructure without end user knowledge. Now, we also have what's called a denial of service attack, or what's known as DDoS. Now, this is a type of cyber attack in which a malicious actor aims to render a computer or other device unavailable to its intended users by interrupting the device's normal functioning. DDoS attacks typically function by overwhelming or flooding a targeted machine with requests until normal traffic is unable to be processed, resulting in a denial of service to additional users. A DDoS attack is characterized by using a single computer to launch the attack. Now, and then we also have what's called a distributed denial of service attack. Now, this is a type of DDoS attack that comes from many distributed sources, such as a botnet DDoS attack. Now we get down to the crux of what we're looking at here, and that is called destructive wiperware. So a wiperware's purpose is to render data inaccessible and unusable. However, unlike ransomware, the intent is not to restore access after a ransom has been paid. Wiper destroys data forever, and this can be accomplished in a couple of ways. The contents of the files can be encrypted or overwritten, or the attacker could render them impossible to access by attacking the operating system itself. So reasons for using wipers are, number one is sabotage, number two is destruction of evidence, and number three is cyber war. So what are some of the wiper techniques? You have, number one, you have overwriting files. Number 2, you have encrypting files. Number 3, you have what's called a master boot record corruption. And you have 4, the master file table corruption. So, and we're going to get into basically how to protect against wipers and some best practices, and also how to recover after a wiperware attack as we get to the end here. So let's pop back over here for a second. So they conducted these 2 exercises in March and April of this year, and these exercises were based on what's called the Operational Resilience Framework. I'm going to show you a PDF for that here as we get toward the end of the video. And they developed this was developed in conjunction with industry stakeholders and financial regulators. The goal was to test the operational resilience of financial institutions and help them assess how to reach minimum viable service levels after a wiperware attack that included an outage of ACH payment systems. That way, even if they couldn't be completely up and running, they could at least deliver direct deposits, online bill payments, and other key services. As a special kind of guest, they invited a gentleman named Bill Nelson, who's the chairman of the GRF, to be a guest writer. But basically, he was a guest writer for this article and to share information about the tabletop exercise. So let's go. What was the exercise in general? So in March, the exercise had 260 registrants, and the April exercise had 420. So close to 700 total. So players came from banks, credit unions, and core processors. Players came from professionals, including IT, 29%, operations, 38%, risk management, business continuity and compliance, 28%, communications, 1.5%, and treasury management, 2.5%. So during each 4.5-hour exercise, they conducted 3 segments. Number 1, they started with the scenario that we didn't have a lot of information on what was happening. We played video recordings of fictional news stories with interviews in front of the Federal Reserve after the ACH network was disrupted, in order to get the players into the mindset that it was a real event. Actors portraying consumers made comments like, "I couldn't get my direct deposit today," or "I couldn't make my bill payments online." Number 2, in the second segment, we introduced reports that indicated this was a destructive malware attack and hundreds of institutions were affected. And then number 3, the third segment, took place on day 5 after the attack, and most of the fictional institutions were back up and running, but there were still a few hundred that weren't because they did not have adequate operational resilience policies and procedures. Later in the scenario, they had some additional attacks, including a denial of service attack in which customers couldn't access their online banking. Surprisingly, we found that more than half of the participants don't employ DDoS remediation services. More than half of our attendees reported that they had never taken part in a destructive attack exercise, and 90% found unintended consequences from this event. So that's some big stuff there. So let's back that up for a second. So we had this scenario where the ACH system goes down, and then we found out that the banks were attacked by destructive malware, and then we fast forward 5 days later, and many of the institutions have gotten back up on their feet, but there's a few hundred that are still having all kinds of problems. And so, what they found out after going through this scenario is that basically more than half of the participants basically employed no type of DDoS remediation services, and that basically more than half of the attendants reported that they had never taken part in a destructive attack exercise, and that 90% found unintended consequences from the event. So this is some very telling stuff here. So, and now we get into tips for recovering after a wiperware attack. So as a result of the tabletop exercise, they identified a few areas where many institutions could benefit from enhancing their approach. The following are some of the tips to help financial leaders reinforce both their cybersecurity framework and their recovery plans in the event of an outage attack on their system. So number 1, knowing your minimum viable service level requirements. So you need to determine the time frame within which you can be back up and running, or at least when you can provide minimum viable service levels. Like we found through the exercise that only 41% of participants have service delivery objectives to meet these minimum viable service levels. Figure out how you will reinstall all of your functionality, including auxiliary capabilities like risk management systems and new customer files. You also need to determine how you're making decisions on originating transactions if your risk filter containing customers' transactions limits is still down. Moreover, most financial institutions encrypt their data, but if everything is wiped, then encryption keys may also be wiped. You'll need a plan to recover data and protect that data again right away. So number 2, establishing a cybersecurity risk management plan. They also asked participants if they had a cybersecurity risk management control framework in place. And the good news is that close to 90% did say yes. So we encourage people to refer to the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework for guidance. Number 3, preparing for regulatory compliance during an outage. So you should consider hiring a forensic company to work with your legal team to meet the legal requirements for reporting. This also protects your interests in terms of making sure the forensic company finds the source of the problem so that you can remediate it. And then finally, number 4, creating immutable and distributed backups. Like the exercise emphasized the concept of having immutable and distributed backups to data and systems architecture. This is a key component of operational resilience. And it goes on to quote, I think a lot of people were not completely aware of the need to have both distributed and immutable backups in place. We also discussed the concept of air gapping, separating an institution's core operations and its backup system so the backup is immutable and that it really can't be wiped or distorted because it's out of the institution's mainstream processing capabilities. So, and then basically the blog post wraps up by saying, based on the data we gathered and the feedback from participants, by the end of both exercises, we realized we should provide exercises like this more often. The exercise helped many security leaders in the financial industry gain insight into what a wiperware attack would mean, not just for their institution, but for the industry as a whole. We hope that there is greater preparedness for those professionals and their companies as a result of participating in the exercises. Our goal was to get to a point where more financial institutions feel ready for such an attack and can minimize their downtime to ensure the least disruption to financial services across the nation. So I thought when I read this, I thought that this was really, really good. I thought this was a phenomenal exercise. I thought it was something that a lot of banks, should be working on or should at least participate in from time to time. Because again, I think it's just great practice to go through something like this. Now, real quick, just a couple other things here. So how do you protect against wiper attacks? So number 1 is data backups, which they said. Number 2 is employee training. In other words, i.e. going through an exercise like this, as well as additional training on cybersecurity and everything else. And then number 3, email security. And when we get into this PDF in a second, you'll see business email compromise, huge issue. Number 4, patch management. And then number 5, account security. And number 6, endpoint security. So basically, again, number 1, data backups. And number 2, employee training. Number 3, email security. Number 4, patch management. Number 5, account security. And number 6, endpoint security. But wiperware is far more deadly than you may realize. And what I'd like to say on that is basically destructive wiperware has been used as an espionage tool between nation states. So Stuxnet, if people remember the Stuxnet attack, that was an attack that destroyed the centrifuges used by Iran for its nuclear development program. And then Iran came back and then did some other attacks, which I'm going to mention here in a second. So now what we're looking at here, this is called Enhancing Operational Resilience for ACH Network Participants. And this is a PDF file. I put a link to this in the description below, along with a link to the blog post. And this is basically 5 measures that address cybersecurity and operational resilience for financial institutions' ACH payment operations. So if you scroll down here, it has an executive summary. And then we go down a little farther. It gives you background, the operational resilience framework. And then you go down, it has like threat assessment. And then so threat assessment, number 1 is account takeover. Number 2 is business email compromise, BEC, and impersonation fraud. Number 3 is distributed denial of service attack, DDoS, what I mentioned at the beginning. Number 4 is ransomware. And number 5 is destructive wiperware. And like I said here, and it talks in here about The Stuxnet was an attack that destroyed centrifuges used by Iran for its nuclear development program. The wiperware, known as Shamoon, was used to attack Saudi Aramco and Razgas, which resulted in the deletion of 3/4 of the company's data and destruction of more than 30,000 computers that had to be replaced. So, these attacks are obviously absolutely state-of-the-art technology, and they're absolutely cutting edge. But this is like, I almost look at this as like the nuclear option of cyber warfare at the moment. And you release one of these things on somebody, and it's gonna do some serious damage. And if you're not aware of the Saudi Aramco and the Razgas, those attacks, those attacks were crippling for those companies, crippling. They probably spent the months not being able to get back up and running, and then probably the better part of a year to get things probably somewhat back to normal, if not longer. But yeah, go back and look up some of those articles if you're curious, and see kind of what was going on there. But again, this is no joke. I think it's again, I would say it would be far more common for you to get attacked with something like malware, ransomware, a DDoS attack, maybe a distributed DDoS attack. But a true wiperware cyber attack would, that would be one heck of an operation, and that would be obviously probably more so carried out by a nation state actor, but you never know. That's kind of the point. You never know. And then at the end here, it just kind of has the federal response, emphasis on operational resilience by U.S. banking regulators, operational resilience measures for ACH participants. And then it has a little conclusion here at the end. So, but very, very nice little PDF, something to take a look at. And like I said, and then the blog post here in the BID Daily Newsletter. But I thought this was really interesting. I thought this was a great way to just kind of talk about this wiperware exercise, best practices. Again, just to reiterate, tips for kind of if you get hit with an attack. How do you recover? Number one is knowing your minimum viable service level requirements, establishing a cybersecurity risk management plan, preparing for regulatory compliance during an outage, and then creating immutable and distributed backups. So, which I think are fantastic tips, and I think you could apply those to basically any cyber attack that you get hit with. You could follow these guidelines. And these tips basically for doing this. So there you have it. I thought this was kind of I thought this was a neat exercise today to kind of go through some of these different potential cyber attacks you could get hit with. Some great tips for how, kind of best practices for how to prevent it in the first place. But then also, if you do get hit with something like this, what do you need to do to recover from it? So again, I hope people find this one kind of interesting. I found it kind of interesting. Went through, it was like I knew what a wiperware attack was, but I guess I didn't really relate it to necessarily to Stuxnet and some of those other larger attacks that happened overseas. So, but anyway, if I'll wrap up with this. If you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. That always helps the channel. Please remember we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please make sure to leave your comments down below, as I always do like getting back to people. And keep an eye out, because I will be back with more episodes real soon. And thanks again for watching.